My name is Brennan. I'm going to be talking about avoiding public surveillance systems. So a little bit about me. I am a political science major turned threat analyst. I'm originally based out of the East Coast. I spent some time on the West Coast for a little while, and now I'm back on the East Coast of the United States. Moving during COVID-19, always a fun idea. Be safe if you're planning to do it. I'm also an avid knitter, I'm a cat mom, and I am a frequent project starter. I imagine many of us probably are. We probably started projects, put them aside, found them again and restarted them. So feel free to follow me on Twitter, _cosmonaut_. And let's get started. So here's my agenda. We're going to be kind of talking about what public surveillance is, why it's really important, looking at the different case studies related to the Hong Kong protesters, and then also kind of what current research and projects are going on right now. What can you and I do as everyday people out in the world? Some takeaways, and then lastly, a bunch of resources for further reading that you guys can do as you expand upon your OSINT journey. So very first of all, what's public surveillance? So surveillance is the active or passive tracking of individuals by law enforcement, public entities, companies, and others through use of technology systems. So this is kind of my definition, and also kind of the combination of other definitions, Webster Dictionary, other definitions that I found throughout the interwebs. And there's really two types. So the first one is physical surveillance. So using technologies such as license plate readers and the Ring or Nest cameras to determine where you are, where you're going, who you're with, those types of things where you can physically watch somebody through a camera and place them at a specific location and spot. The other way is through technological surveillance. So this is kind of broken down into two things. Metadata-based, which is where you use technology such as a stingray, which is also another term for an ISMI catcher, which is essentially a fake cell phone tower where your cell phone will just kind of connect to it thinking that it's real, and you are then actually sending some things like who you are when you're talking to somebody. So if I'm on the phone and I connect to this ISMI or a stingray, it tells me that, hey, I'm on the phone right now and who I'm talking to. It does not include content from like what exactly I'm saying to somebody. That's the other type of technological surveillance, is content-based. So using technology to access your phone, to access your computer, to see kind of what am I actually typing, what is my actual message, instead of saying, hey, I sent message A to person B, it's saying, hey, I sent message A saying, hi, person B, it's Lauren, and then person B receives it. It's also, can contain things like what pictures are being sent and what else you actually have saved on your phone. So why should surveillance be important to you? So there are quite a few reasons why. The very first one is geofencing warrants by law enforcement. So these are warrants where essentially if a robbery happens, say 2 miles down the block from where I am, the police can then go to Google, or they can go to Verizon or Sprint or T-Mobile. I think they're actually the same thing now. And they can say, hey, Google, I really want a list of everybody in this 5-mile radius from where this robbery occurred. And Google generally will supply it because it's a warrant. And if you happen to have just been walking down the street or just driving by that same time frame when that robbery occurred, you could then be considered a potential suspect by law enforcement because you were just kind of dragged in that warrant as just being passing by. You are now a suspect by law enforcement because you were caught in this geofencing warrant. There's also a huge potential for abuse by law enforcement officials and also non-law enforcement officials and entities to track and stalk individuals. This has happened several times when bounty hunters were able to convince Verizon and T-Mobile and Sprint to give up location data on the people that they were searching for, and sometimes it actually wasn't the right people and they ended up, causing harm. There's also other times where, police have used these phone tracking and, phone warrants and other types of apps that you can install on your phone to track their spouses, to track, potential suspects. And it's not legal, or not let me clarify. It's not necessarily illegal, but it's definitely not morally right. Facial recognition systems are also not infallible, and they are very much known to have biases against people of color faces, so specifically against Asian and Black faces, and specifically the darker the skin tone, the harder facial recognition systems have at determining faces are different. I believe there was a study done like about a couple years ago by the New York Times that actually showed, it's between 10 and 100 times more likely for a facial recognition system to actually misidentify a face depending on the color of that individual's skin, specifically from the picture. And then also, large companies are partnering with law enforcement agencies. So you have Clearview.ai, which was in the news last year. You have Amazon, you have Google, you have Microsoft, who all partner and work on either facial recognition, or they have location, or they have, content and credit card data that can all be turned over to law enforcement officials on request. You see Twitter turns over, details to law enforcement about, various tweets or actions by individuals, and sometimes, they generally just comply. You don't necessarily need a warrant to it. It depends on the company. Some companies do say, no, you have to have a warrant before I will turn over this information. Other companies just, anytime law enforcement requests it, they will turn it over to you. But the very bottom line is the fact that privacy is a right, and it should absolutely be important to you to protect your privacy from others who seek to gain information about you. Just existing in the world shouldn't mean that I am trapped every single day. You should have the right to, do whatever you want inside your own home, or, wandering around without being under the fear that somebody is tracking you. So, case study, the Hong Kong protesters. So we've all seen huge amounts of news regarding the Hong Kong protesters. People in Hong Kong live in one of the most heavily surveilled cities in the world. And these protesters have been going on since, I believe, early 2019. They're still going on today. There's still protesting that's happening. And they are an amazing case study for understanding how everyday citizens can work together to avoid being caught on camera, to avoid surveillance systems. So in this far left top corner right up here, you see a huge amount of umbrellas. So the protesters, and I'm just going to call them HKP or protesters, use umbrellas oftentimes to protect themselves from being caught by overhead surveillance. You can kind of see, a security camera up here, potential security cameras all up along these buildings. And by holding umbrellas above their heads, it makes it harder for top-down security cameras to identify them. Additionally, you see these masks and you see these black and very similar clothing Hong Kong protesters are wearing. This allows them to avoid being caught on facial recognition systems. It allows them also, to combat tear gas and other water cannons, police deterrents that occur. Down here, you see a little bit more clearly, they're wearing masks, they're wearing goggles, they have hard hats to cover their heads, they're wearing gloves, anything that's kind of remotely identifiable about them is covered. And then also in this bottom picture here, you can see that they're actively destroying surveillance cameras so that police cannot find them. The other things that Hong Kong protesters are doing, that's not necessarily physically in person, is they're not bringing their phones, or if they are bringing their phones, they're turning the location off. They're not connecting to the cell towers. They are, using separate burner phones that they have instead of their personal phones, so that they cannot be connected back to these protests. They're also doing things like turning off, fingerprint or face recognition on their iPhones or their Android devices, so that police can have a harder time breaking into them. They're using platforms like Telegram and WhatsApp, which are, large platforms to coordinate between themselves to plan protests and whatnot. And they're also, doing all of this in a decentralized manner. So there's no one individual that can cause, the entire system to fail. And they have just amazing operational security. Well worth looking into them more for understanding kind of what they're doing. Additionally, what you see here on the screen is kind of the Hong Kong protester uniform. And, we see the glasses, the mask, we see the black clothing, that makes it easy to blend in. We see the backpack that they have, the phone, potentially, they have towels and everything to kind of, wipe away sweat, tears, whatever. They also have, and this is, I think, one of the most important things, is a change of clothes. So one thing that is, sometimes talked about on social media platforms related to Hong Kong protesters is the fact that, they'll swarm onto trains and use umbrellas to block surveillance systems and then change out of their clothing so that when they then exit the trains, they're not wearing the same clothing that they were when they were protesting. And it's a lot harder for authorities, for anybody to catch them on camera, because the most identifiable thing about them at the time would have been their clothing. So, by going from wearing all black clothing to maybe, a bright blue t-shirt or, some jeans and, a fun colored top or jacket, you're immensely changing the perception of who you were from the protester to the individual citizen, and completely changing the profile of you from that security system to the regular citizen. So the next kind of case study we're going to be looking at is this idea of anti-surveillance research and projects. So there's a bunch that are out there. I'm going to go over very briefly a few of them. So the first one up here is this one right here, done by a professor called Isayo Ishizen, who is from the National Institute of Informatics in Tokyo. It's something called a privacy visor. So you can see here, the visor is not turned on, and they can still, they find the face, but with the visor turned on, they can't actually determine that that's his face anymore. It's very similar to this down here, which is a face mask that is part of, I believe, a Cyber Days project that is using, different patterns on face masks to blur and to prevent facial recognition systems from identifying faces. Up here in the middle right here is a project from Northwestern and MIT titled Adversarial T-shirt, Evading Person Detectors in a Physical World. So you can see here, it's a pretty small image, but it kind of goes through and it shows, that the person wearing these patterns on their shirt is not identified by surveillance systems. The closer that individual gets, the harder it is to identify them as an actual person, according to the platform that they were using to conduct their research. Similarly, over here, we have a project from Adversarial Fashion, which what they use is that they have, as you can see here, they use clothing, they have t-shirts, they have skirts, they have scarves and masks, and they have different license plate readers that are actually, connecting and showing up on different systems and can be used to kind of confuse them and, hey, this is not actually a car, but the systems don't know that. And then finally, on the bottom here, we have a project called Reflecticles. And this is a project that is really fascinating. So as you can see here, the individual's face is completely blurred out because they are wearing glasses like the ones that I am wearing right now that are actually reflecting the infrared light from surveillance cameras. So you cannot identify individual faces, especially at night when those cameras are in use. So how can you avoid surveillance systems every day? So there's a few things, and this is a little bit geared more towards the protesting side, since we are in a very unique time, and I am sure that a lot of people may be worried about their physical safety as well as their health with COVID-19 going on. So the very first thing is the EFF Security Starter Pack. This is a really good program that EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, has put out, and it's geared towards many different individuals, whether you're an everyday person, whether you're a journalist, whether you're a protester. They have different security packs for you that help you secure your digital life and make it harder for law enforcement and others to track you and to get into your systems and to get your data. The next one is also the Motherboard Guide to Avoiding State Surveillance. This is another general guide to, ensuring that you're, encrypting your systems, that you are, when you're texting somebody, you're not using SMS, which can be intercepted. You're using, an encrypted messaging platform like WhatsApp or Signal or Telegram. Next is kind of wearing anti-surveillance makeup and or easily removable clothing that you can kind of change directly out of and change immediately to avoid, the same clothing that you're wearing being tracked all the way through, the city or through the block or wherever you are. One note about anti-surveillance makeup, however, is that it only the specific anti-surveillance makeup that's out there that's linked in this slide right here only works with certain kinds of facial recognition systems. So if you are planning to wear anti-surveillance makeup to, say, a protest or just in your everyday life, please make sure you're doing research on what is going to be the most widely covered type of anti-surveillance makeup. Actually, juggalo makeup works really, really well for anti-surveillance makeup. Additionally, you also have just kind of, you can do plenty of OSINT research everywhere, looking at, municipal city records and other, federal records to see kind of what exactly are their facial recognition systems that are out there that are being used in your city, in your location. And then you can tailor your anti-surveillance makeup towards that. Securing your home and smart cameras. So I know we've all probably heard about, I think it was a few months ago how Ring and Nest cameras were being hacked, and attackers were actually watching children play in their homes and harassing individuals in their homes. So please make sure that you have your Ring and your Nest cameras, any other type of smart camera that you have. Please make sure that you are using a very strong password with those, to use two-factor authentication wherever possible. But also, look at the guidelines, look at your terms of service with those platforms, and see if they are sharing your camera data with law enforcement. Some platforms, like I believe Ring is, they have a partnership with law enforcement. And so ensure that you are aware of kind of the policies that your smart camera provider has in regards to law enforcement, because it can be shared. They may or may not need your permission depending on the terms of service that you've signed. So just to, always read the terms of service wherever possible. Another kind of protesting tip: avoid posting pictures of people on social media sites without permission. So this goes for anyone, whether it's a small child all the way up to, your grandmother. Some people just don't want their picture posted on social media for whatever reason. Others just don't want their picture posted because it could be tracked. If there's a picture of me out on the internet somewhere in an Instagram post and I'm at a party, that image is always going to be there, and it could be used by law enforcement to place me at a scene somewhere. So it's not, or to, it's just kind of one of those things where don't do it without posting permission, because you never know kind of what that other person's actual, threat methodology is, or what their own concerns may be with social media. Remove location services and tagging from your phone or social media. So this is just kind of a general privacy, operational security metric. If I'm scoping out a prison for a social engineering engagement, I want to make sure that I turn my phone location off, or that I adjust my location services and tagging so that I'm not kind of letting law enforcement or letting my target know that I'm already near this whatever prison or institution that I am attempting to gain access to as a social engineer. So this is kind of something that you can use just as just to keep in mind. I don't want everybody knowing where I've been in my life. It's cool to post pictures from the beach, but if I'm posting pictures from my house, and now I post pictures from the county that I'm in North Carolina, where I'm based in now, that's a lot closer to my home, and it's very easy for then somebody to kind of find me based on that. And then lastly, kind of use Tor, which is the Onion router. So use a platform that allows you to browse the internet anonymously, or use VPN when browsing online. This helps you avoid what's called surveillance capitalism. So this avoids ad tracking, this avoids kind of behavioral profiling that is very common now, and it's pretty automated, that allows systems to kind of guesstimate and anticipate what you may buy in the future, and then kind of provide that as advertising to you. So I'm sure many of you guys have been, seen that the meme that goes around where you're talking about surveillance, or you're talking about, wetsuits, and then all of a sudden the ad pops up. This is kind of very similar to that. And then very last thing is encourage local communities to change your guidelines for public surveillance system usage. This is a huge thing. You can do it, just write to your local committee, write to your city, look at what they're using and how they're using surveillance systems, and work to change the laws to make them a little bit easier for individuals to avoid being tracked so actively by law enforcement. Final takeaways: You're going to be surveilled at some level no matter where you are. Phone, satellite, GPS, etc. You can limit this amount by avoiding said types of technology as much as possible. Changing your appearance can help you avoid being tracked, but please do your research. You know, like I mentioned with the facial recognition and anti-surveillance makeup, technology changes all the time. Your methodology for avoiding that technology is going to need to change as well. And then also, specifically for my protest groups, the larger the group, the harder it will be to individually track someone. If you go to protests, go to the larger ones or go in groups, and please be careful. I know it's a very contentious time, but stand up for your rights, you know, protest, don't be a jerk, stay safe. Thank you. For any
Lauren,
questions?
thank you for, yeah, there was actually one that came up in the chats. Just someone wanted clarification. You had mentioned tying up hair, and someone will provide their own comments to it, but just to hear some of your thoughts.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so someone, Katie Bell was asking, why do you think hair should be tied up? Making a point on, wouldn't it be easier to see a side profile or something of that sort?
Yes. So it can be, I think it's generally a personal preference. So for instance, my hair is fairly short. If I tied it up, it does kind of change the look of my face. If I leave it down, it's fine. You know, longer hair can actually easily be caught in different things. So you can maybe leave traces behind, DNA evidence. Generally, it's a bit of a more personal preference. It's really suggested there as a way to kind of keep moving. You get it off, you get it out of the way. It's hidden mostly, so it's harder to see a hair color, especially if you have a vibrant hair color, like say pink or blue. That's really recognizable. So having it kind of tied up and tucked under a cap or something will make it harder to determine and find and identify you.